I'd like to introduce Tom Davis, who got an honorary degree from Amherst a couple of years ago, which made it his second degree since he graduated with us, obviously, in the class of '71. Tom, as you know, is a former moderate Republican 7-term congressman from Northern Virginia and former chair of the Republican National Congressional Committee. As such, you will see that he knows every congressional district, including all of yours, with an incredible level of detail and sophistication. And he's going to discuss the coming election, which seems to be pretty up in the air at this point, the upcoming conventions, not so much, and in general, the subject of his book, which was the depressing stalemate that he was the victim of while a moderate congressman in Washington. Since leaving the House, Tom's worked for Deloitte. He's also the chairman of the board of George Mason University. He just informed me, not surprisingly, that he's the 2-time winner of a political trivia contest in Washington, where I'm sure the competition is very high. And as I said, a recent honorary degree winner from Amherst College. Tom Davis.
George, thank you. Well, thank you, and thank you for giving me part of your afternoon. George, the most important part of my resume is I left Congress undefeated and unindicted, and I'm just really happy. So what's happening in America is not unique. There's the same kind of forces, globalization, immigration, wealth disparity are going on in other countries. A couple things make us unique. One is we still operate in a 2-party framework. In other countries, we're seeing third parties draw up. And then I've got some other unique factors to America that I'm going to discuss. So I want to kind of discuss how we got to where we are and kind of where the middle has just gone in American politics. And we've gone into what we say the ideological sorting of the parties. I'd like to start this off with an illustration of how dysfunctional is Washington today. Well, Dan Snyder, who's the owner of the Washington football team, and I don't know if I dare say it at this politically correct college, but it's the Washington Redskins. But Snyder admitted a couple of weeks ago that the term Washington Redskins was indeed divisive and polarizing. And he was openly contemplating changing the name from the Washington Redskins to just the Redskins. So I think that kind of... So I've got a series of slides I'm going to go through. If at any point, the slides probably take 25 minutes, and then we're going to do questions. But at any point you have a question, just raise your hand, and I'm happy to explain this. A lot of this was taken from a book I wrote with Martin Frost, who was the chairman of the Democratic Campaign Committee. I'd been chairman of the House Republican Campaign Committee. We got thrown together on talk shows and had a lot of the same observations about why the middle has gone. And we were joined by a guy named Rich Cohen, who was the editor of the Almanac of American Politics. And so we wrote a book together released last year. My publisher was Bruce Butterfield, who was my roommate in college. So some of the slides are taken from that, and then some of them I made more contemporary to show how we got to where it is today. Because people say, how do we get these choices? I mean, some people are happy with the choices, some are not. I'm not taking a stand on that. I just want to explain where it is. I'm not defending the way things are, I'm just explaining it. So 3 macro factors unique to American politics have occurred over the last, what I'd say, 25 years. The first is what I call the fact that we have so many single-party districts today. We've always had single-party districts where you knew who was going to win, which party controlled the seat, but today it's at an all-time high. In the House of Representatives, fully 80% of these districts are predetermined which party is going to win in November. The real race is the primary election. November is just a constitutional formality they've got to go through to take their seat. So it means that members spend most of their time and their attention and hew their voting records to please their primary voters. And primary voters are a pretty thin ideological slice of the electoral pie. On the Republican side, they tend to be pretty right. On the Democratic side, they tend to be pretty left. I don't think we've ever had a Republican conference as conservative as this, or a Democratic conference in the House as liberal as it is today. And I'm going to get into more details a little bit later. But members of my party always looking over their right shoulder, seeing are they conservative enough, or they get challenged with some super PAC dropping money on them and the talk radio folks hitting them up in a primary. We have a chapter in our book on Eric Cantor's defeat in Virginia. A lot of folks who don't follow this closely thought Eric Cantor was about as conservative as you could get in the Republican leadership, but clearly wasn't conservative enough for his constituents in ex-urban Richmond. And what happened to Cantor is he mutated from a leader that was in Obama's face and undoing deals that Boehner was doing, and his constituents were saying right on, to somebody that started opening up the government, voting to raise the debt ceiling, negotiating a compromise on immigration, and his constituents, at least his primary voters, didn't like that. And although he had a 99-to-1 spending advantage in the primary, he lost like 58 to 42. To a guy who was vastly outspent. The turnout in that race, by the way, 50% over the presidential race. Just a lot of angry conservatives came out, were not interested in compromising, and I'll get into that a little later. Democrats have the same kind of problems on their side, but they do have a president, and when you have a president, it kind of unites things, it kind of cools things down. If you don't, it doesn't hold it together, and you look pretty dysfunctional. Now, there's these single-party districts, as I said, we've always had them. But there are three unique factors over the last 25 years that have really contributed to this. One, as you see up here, is what we call residential sorting patterns. The parties today are organized, their coalitions are organized around race, ethnicity, and cultural. Economics is like the fourth indicator of how people choose their parties. I'll give you an example. Some of the very wealthiest precincts in this country, particularly in the Northeast and Midwest, voted heavily for Obama. Potomac, Maryland, McLean, Virginia, you want to look at the Upper East Side in Manhattan, heavy Obama, and 71 of the 100 poorest counties in this country voted for Romney. So these are not economic coalitions. These are based on what I call cultural issues, and I'll get into that a little later. And people tend to live in neighborhoods of people who are like them. You like to live around people who think like you do. There's a book on this called The Big Sort by my friend Bill Bishop, who's a demographer out of Austin, Texas. And he has a piece in his book where he talks about the neighborhood he used to live in Austin. And he's sitting there in a neighborhood picnic. And one of his neighbors comes up to him. He says, what a wonderful neighbor. What a diverse neighborhood you have here. We have African Americans, we have Asians, we have Hispanics, we have gays. We're just really diverse. And Bishop looks at me and says, yes. He said, but do we have any Republicans? And Bishop said then he moved 30 miles outside of Austin into Williamson County, where the neighbors, instead of trapping their rats and letting them go, end up shooting them for sport. So there are huge cultural divides, and people tend to pick their parties' preferences more along those lines. I mean, some of us still pick economics, but I'm just saying that's the way we've been aligned, and people live in like-minded neighborhoods, so you're getting this sorting out at the partisan. But there are two other factors. One is the Voting Rights Act, which I think was passed with the best of intentions. But 50 years later, the end result has been in the Deep South today, in the House delegations, all you have are white Republicans and black Democrats. And no need to talk to the other side because they play no role in the nomination process in these safely drawn seats. So you can ask yourself, is this a good policy outcome? Is this really what was intended? But it keeps everything separated at this point. And then finally, you just have, with the data analytics available today, you've got just plain old-fashioned gerrymandering, which is a Massachusetts innovation going back a couple of hundred years. And with the data analytics today, you can draw these districts with precision. And I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. If this were the only problem, you could probably solve it, but there are two other factors that have occurred on top of that. One is the media business models have changed. When the Federal Communications Commission did away with what was called the fairness doctrine or the equal time doctrine, all of a sudden some radio station owners said, well, you know, why do we have to show both sides? And so talk radio sprang up, and they get a group of dedicated listeners. And now this is morphed into cable news, where you get dedicated viewers who you feed them each night with what they want to hear. And then you move on top of that, and I always call cable news, and I do a fair amount of commentary on cable news, but this is, in my opinion, not always serious news. These are entertainment business models that are very successful because they have a dedicated cadre of people who tune in to hear this stuff all the time. And then on top of that, you've now got the internet, where over half the people get their views and their information. And of course, what I call the crap to content ratio over the internet is just exceptionally high. And the illustration I like to use is, somebody sent me Barack Obama's birth certificate from Kenya over the internet, and I looked at it and it looked pretty real, it is documented. And then somebody else sent me his birth certificate from Indonesia. And you just said, you know, this can't be right. And so the stuff that gets sent over and forwarded back and forth on this is a lot of garbage. This is a lot of non-facts. But members go out and talk to their constituents, and this is what their people are reading, and this is what they believe. And they'll quote the Congressional Budget Office or the Office of Management and Budget or some statistics from the GAO or something, and then they say their constituents don't believe it because they're getting all this other stuff. These are successful business models. This is how you build a business model where you can sell ads, is to feed people what they want to hear every night or every day. And it has added to the polarization. We had a member of Congress in Virginia who will remain nameless, but he had announced when the government was shut down that he was going to vote to reopen the government. He had 18,000 federal employees in his district. He was feeling the heat. Sean Hannity put him up on the screen as one of 18 traitors that were, his phone was so bad he couldn't get a phone call out of his cell phone. Angry people calling him, "Why are you caving? Why are you?" And he had to walk the statement back. Another member at that point called me and said, "Tom," he said, "I'm in a dilemma." He said, "I'm part of the leadership." He said, "We got to reopen the government. We're getting killed on this thing." He said, "But I got a primary coming up. The three main conservative super PACs, Club for Growth, Freedom Works, Heritage Action, they've all ranked this vote. This is a vote that is being graded." He said, "These guys come in and put money after me." He said, "I'm going to have to scramble." And so I gave him the best political advice I could. I said, "Is it going to pass?" And he said, "Yeah, I think we got the votes to pass it." I said, then you don't have to vote for it. And he didn't, and nobody came after him. He was reelected. But the pressure on these members, they like getting reelected. That's kind of, nobody likes to leave Congress defeated. It's just, there's nothing wrong if you lose for the right reasons, but nobody likes to leave that way. It makes your afterlife a little bit harder, and you're labeled loser and all this stuff. So members like keeping their seats, and so they vote accordingly. And these business models in the media play a huge role in this. On the fairness doctrine, I'll just say it got pretty ridiculous too, because if you remember the 1980 election, they would show these Ronald Reagan movies on TV, and then somebody else would demand equal time because you were showing Reagan. And so that's why they did away with it. But that was the beginning of the end of what I would call objective, vetted media. And then finally, the money in politics. Congress passed a law called McCain-Feingold. I will confess to you, I was a floor manager against the bill. I said at the time, I said, so we're banning this soft money from the political parties and the candidates, and I understand it's got the appearance of corruption. I said, but where do you think this money's going to go? You think this money's just going to disappear? Well, in point of fact, the money didn't disappear. It's sprung up now. It's gone from the political parties, which have been a centering force in American politics for 200 years. It's out on the wings now. It's out on the right, and it's out on the left. The Citizens United case helped bring this in, but the real case that created super PACs wasn't Citizens United. It was the Speech Now case out of the D.C. Circuit, where, by the way, Merrick Garland, the Supreme Court nominee, wrote the opinion. And that is what created the super PACs. It was an outgrowth of Citizens United, which was an outgrowth of Buckley Vallejo and a long series of free speech cases coming out of the Supreme Court. But the end result is, in a critical House or Senate race today, you'll find more money spent by independent groups, not all of it transparent, I might add, than by the political parties and the candidates combined. And most of this money tends to be ideological, and a super PAC can drop $1 million on a candidate like that, and the candidate has to make it up in $2,700 increments at most. So it has weighted this down, and I say one of the unintended consequences of this has been that it has moved the parties out. So look at it this way. If the districts have moved from centered competitive districts out here, if the media models have moved from centered vetted news media out here, and if the money's moved from the parties, which are basically centered historically out here, what do you expect? And so that's what we've got. This is a typical congressional district. This is the 3rd District of Maryland. It's part of a Democratic gerrymander in Maryland, John Sarbanes' district. This is a voting rights district out of Chicago. We call this the earmuff district. Representative Gutierrez has it. It creates 2 Hispanic parts of Chicago that are fused together by a freeway in the western suburbs. This is another district out of Maryland, Dutch Ruppersberger's district. I always said, if Picasso were alive today, he wouldn't have to go through his blue period to get his artistic fulfillment. He could probably monetize pretty well drawing congressional districts and get the same level of this is my favorite. This is a Republican gerrymander in Pennsylvania. This looks like one dog kicking another dog. In Pennsylvania, the Republicans did such a good job, or bad job, depending which side you're on, of drawing the districts. In 2012, Democrats got more votes for the U.S. House in Pennsylvania than Republicans. but the congressional delegation was 12 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So this system is skewed. Right now it is skewed in favor of the Republicans. It's going to be very difficult for them to lose the House. In 2012, nationally, a Democratic year, Obama was reelected. Democrats got more votes for the House of Representatives nationally than Republicans did, 1.4 million more votes, but Republicans still had a 17-seat lead. So when you look at the midterms, it would take a pretty sizable Democratic wave to take back the House because now I could probably point to 70 districts where you have this done. Remember, in most states, it's the politicians that draw the lines. The state legislature draws the line for the congressional delegation. I will confess that in 2001, my congressional district in Northern Virginia, I won a seat that was drawn by my predecessor. When she was in the legislature, she drew a seat for herself in the House and won it. And then I beat her 2 years later. And I had to struggle. It was a pretty heavy Democratic district, but I had 4 terms of it. But when redistricting came up in 2001, the chairman of the committee in the state house that drew the line was my wife. So she took care of me. I didn't create the system. I just, you operate within the rules. But you got to admit, this doesn't pass the laugh test. This does not pass the laugh test. Over the last 25 years, we've also seen the party bases have moved. People who 25, 30 years ago might have called themselves Republicans. It's a little bit different group, and the party bases have also moved way apart from each other. This shows that if you go back to 1994, this is a Pew Research, this was 10,000 registered voters across the country. The difference between, there's always been a Republican and Democratic difference on government regulations of business, usually does more harm than good, but today it's almost 40 points. Stricter environmental laws and regulations cost too many jobs and hurt the economy. It was only a 10-point difference. Today, as you can see, is a 35-point difference. I've got about 20 issues that I can go through, including the social issues, which get even, and climate change and all that. But it's just illustrative of the fact that the parties have aligned more, where the Republicans are the conservative party, Democrats are the liberal party. As I like to say, the world belongs to people who vote in primaries, and generally the liberals and conservatives are the ones who turn out. My state's a convention state, Virginia, so that's even more pronounced in terms of factions where the right dominates the Republican process. It's led me to the conclusion that liberals and conservatives have passion, and they show up and they control the nomination process. And while liberals and conservatives have passion, moderates have lives. And they just don't spend as much time at this business. And as the end result, they get general election choices that are not always to their liking. I like this because this is a feeling about Democratic and Republican parties by the decade. If you go back to 1979, 1980, a third of Americans had a positive view of both parties. Today, only 7% have a positive view of both parties. And I got to ask you, who are they? I mean, 1978 and 80, a third had a very positive figure about their party and a negative about the other party. Today, 2/3 think their party is right and the other party is wrong. So the polarization has increased markedly, I think, by every kind of measure that we can take. Now, this is interesting. Some of you might have seen me put this slide on before, but this shows where the middle has gone in what V.O. Key would call party in power. This is how politicians, members of Congress, act once they are elected. National Journal is a very well-respected publication, and they put together each Congress, they take about 100 votes, and they rank members the most liberal and the most conservative. And they have social issues, they've got foreign policy issues, they've got economic issues. But at the end of the day, they sift it together and they rank all 435 members of the House, and they rank all 100 members of the Senate. And I'll tell you, on my side of the aisle, there's a lot of competition to be the most conservative. You got people actually, I mean, what's the conservative vote, and that's where they want to be. And they don't have to read the bill, they just know where they want to be with their elect, and they got the same thing on the left. Well, let's look at the progression here over 30 years. In 1982, the most liberal Republican was Bill Green from New York City. You had to be somewhat liberal to be elected in Manhattan, and he was a Republican. He was an old Rockefeller Republican. The most conservative Democrat was a John Birch Society member out of Georgia. Georgia still pretty much a one-party state in those days where conservatives and liberals would fight it out in the Democratic primary. Republicans didn't really exist. By 1994, that number had dropped from 344 members, which is a broad definition of moderate, between the most liberal and the most conservative, to 252. By 2002, that number had dropped to 137. You see in the trend? And in the last Congress. So you really have basically parliamentary behavior on the part of members of Congress on at least the issues that National Journal ranks on these issues. You may have an issue here on a postal naming or something where it goes different, but on the issues of some import. And by the way, the three Democrats that made that up, Matheson retired in Utah, we had a member in North Carolina retired, and then Barrow in Georgia was defeated. So I mean, it's just gone. There is no middle in terms of congressional behavior today for some of the reasons I discussed. In the Senate, where they claim to have more statesmen, 1982, you had 58 members. This is when Arlen Specter was still a Republican. You had 58 members between the most liberal Republican and the most conservative Democrat. By 1994, it was down to 34. 2002, it was down to 7. And in the last three Congresses, it's just zero. It's just gone. There's no middle at this point. These parties are what we say ideologically sorted. Current House, I am giving the Republicans credit for a special election coming up in a week for John Boehner's seat, which I think they'll win with 70% of the vote. But it's of 247 Republicans and 188 Democrats. This is the highest Republican performance in the House of Representatives since 1929. So Republicans overperformed. They had a great off year in 2014. So I think they will lose seats this midterm, but unlikely to lose 30 seats, unlikely to lose 20. This place is so gerrymandered at this point, makes it very, very hard. Just not that many competitive seats along. Nothing is impossible. But I just say it takes a gigantic Democratic wave. There was some early runs that with Trump on the ticket, this was going to cost. We haven't seen that yet in any polling, but 5-6 months as an attorney in politics, things can still develop. But Republicans likely to continue to control the House. And the rules in the House are such that majority party controls everything. If you got a majority, you can move any bill through in 2 hours. An hour for the rule, an hour for the final vote. And we used to say the minority fulfills two functions. It picks up its paycheck and it makes up the quorum. Majority party writes the rules, and it tends to be a pretty partisan era. The problem that Boehner has had and Ryan has is they can't control enough Republican members sometimes to put 218 votes on the board, and that's created a governance problem for them at this point. But it's majority rule. The Senate, much closer, 54 Republicans, 46 caucus as Democrats. But if you look at this next slide, these are the seats up for re-election this midterm. And what you see, you have 24 Republicans up and only 10 Democrats. Why is that? Because the Republicans had a huge midterm win in 2010. It was their largest midterm gains since 1938. And so some of these Republicans that got caught up in this Republican sweep in 2010 have to run now in a presidential year where the outcome for their party at the presidential level is not as optimistic and not as certain. The blue seats are Republican seats that are up for re-election in states that Obama carried 4 years ago. And those 7 seats are where the Democrats are really putting their efforts. If they win the presidency and 4 Senate seats, they take back the Senate. And with that, you control the gavel, and it's the key to nominations and that kind of thing. 3 of these seats, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, are in states we call blue wall states. These are states that have voted Democrat for president 6 straight times, and I'll get to that in a second. I think the only safe seat in these is probably Iowa. I think Iowa's probably safe for Grassley. It is a small state, and it doesn't have a lot of changeover, and it's one of the places you can still personalize politics. Personalizing a district or a state it's much more difficult to do today than it was 20 years ago. In Northern Virginia, I wasn't known as Tom Davis, the Republican. I was Tom Davis, the guy that got the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. I was Tom Davis who got railed to Dulles. I'd been county executive, so I had a lot of personal cachet that could overcome a bad year. But they've done away with earmarks in Congress now, so it's harder for members, and the population's so transient, and the party committees now really will target any member who's sitting in a district that they shouldn't have been in. But my presidential candidate never carried my district. In fact, just to tell you a story, I ran for Congress in 1994. I was head of the county government in Fairfax. I ran against this Democratic incumbent that had drawn the lines for herself. I was beating her the day I announced, and then the Republicans had a convention and nominated a guy for the U.S. Senate that year named Oliver North, that you might have heard of. Well, North was really popular in the country. He'd go up and hold his gun up, and they'd be cheering. But I had an urban district. I had high rises and everything else, and our first polling showed that Oliver North was absolutely radioactive in my congressional district. He ended up with 29% of the vote. So we had a strategy that whenever Oliver North came to Fairfax, you couldn't find me with a search warrant. And we stayed low, and with the help of the Washington Post and the business community, United Business Community, we were able to win by 9 points as he gets 29% of the day. Harder to do that today. We're seeing more straight ticket voting than at any time in the last 100 years. Just as an aside, my voters in 94 elected me to Congress to protect them from Bill Clinton, and 2 years later they re-elected Clinton to protect him from me. So what happens is the independent voters don't play a role in the nomination process, but as V.O. Key said, he said, voters aren't stupid, he said, but they're not that informed, but they know when the shoe is pinching. And the last 3 times one party has controlled the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they've been swept out in the ensuing midterm election, 1994, 2006, 2010. One-party governance, they tend to overread their mandates, and the voters react accordingly. This just illustrates the straight ticket part of voting and how people are not splitting their tickets. Now, this was an off year. This was the 2014 off-year election. These were the Democratic Senate seats that were up, ranked, the most vulnerable seats, ranked by, from top to bottom by how badly Obama had done in 2012, starting with West Virginia, where he'd gotten 35% of the vote, down to New Hampshire, where he'd gotten 52. So these were all competitive Senate seats, and as you take a look, almost by the book, the worse Obama had done, the more likely the Democrats were to lose the Senate, no matter who they ran. West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito was the first Republican to win a Senate seat in West Virginia since 1956. You had brand names like Landrieu in Louisiana. You had a brand name Pryor in Arkansas. Had been unopposed 6 years before, go down to big defeats. Didn't make a difference. The exception to the rule here is my state of Virginia, where Mark Warner squeezed out 50.4% of the two-party vote. Everyone was shocked on election night that it was so close. He had a 60% approval rating. But as I explained to him, I said, Mark, they like you fine, but these elections are now about who controls the Senate. And you were lucky to survive this. It's a credit to you that you survived. I can talk at length about these races during the Q&A period. So this is Charlie Cook's chart, which he lets me use. This chart is important because it shows the last 6 presidential elections, how states have voted. Here you have 18 states plus the District of Columbia have now voted Democrat for president 6 straight times. At Deloitte, we call that a trend. And the good news for Democrats is this is 242 electoral votes. You only need 270 to win. So Republicans, if they don't flip that, they are drawing to an inside straight. They got to win Florida. They have to win Ohio. They've got to win Virginia. They've got to basically run the tables on these other states to win. Now, Republicans have their own red wall right over here, 13 states that have voted Republican 6 straight times. As I was explaining, even on Donald Trump's worst night, he carries these states. He probably carries 18 states on a bad night. These states only are 102 electoral votes. So Democrats, if the Republicans have an advantage in the way the House districts are drawn, Democrats have an advantage the way the electoral vote counts. Romney carried more congressional districts than Obama, but he got badly beaten in the electoral college. Now, how do these, just to go through my theory about straight ticket voting, in the blue wall states, the Senate lineup is 32 Democrats and 4 Republicans, But 3 of those Republicans were elected in 2010, the biggest Republican off year since 1938, that are up this year, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Pennsylvania. Who's the other Republican? Susan Collins from Maine. Collins goes back to Maine every weekend. She's got about as moderate a voting record as you can have as a Republican. But also Maine is not undergoing a lot of change, so you can still personalize politics there. On the red wall states, the Senate lineup is 25 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Who's the 1 Democrat? It's Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota, who won her first term against a flawed Republican by less than 1% of the vote. And you know, I saw her at a baseball game a couple weeks ago. If Clinton is in the White House in the midterm, it'll be very tough sledding for her. I mean, they're quite aware of the dynamic in these. But the point is, it's no longer all politics is local. All politics, at least at the legislative level, is national. Governorships have a different rhythm, but legislative races, it's getting pretty predictable in terms of how these districts run, and most of these districts are pretty well drawn, so you know which party's going to win them. Republicans have a problem right now because the minority vote is climbing. You see, African American vote has climbed from 8 to 13% of the vote from 1992 to 2012. Hispanic vote from 2% of the electorate to 10%, Asian from 1% to 3%, and Republicans have had a hard time breaking into this. In fact, Romney did worse among Asians than he did among Hispanics. I personally doubt the African American vote will stay this high for Hillary. I think Obama, he had some, being African American, had a greater loyalty, turnout loyalty, should may get the same percent. But I think with these other groups growing, it's a long-term problem for Republicans. You can't continue to pick up white voters. There just aren't enough of them over the long term. This election maybe, but long term, it's a downward spiraling coalition. This talks about the Hispanic vote. As you can see, Republicans have a huge problem. In 2012, they got 27% of the Hispanic vote. 71% for the Democrats. That continues. It's just very difficult in some of these key states for Republicans to be able to win, particularly like Colorado, Nevada. These are swing states. New Mexico has gone in the Democratic column. Given that, Republicans have got to find a way to penetrate this. I think the leaders recognize this. Now, for this election, maybe, but long term, it's a huge problem if they can't break into that vote. Interestingly enough, the last presidential election, 3.8% was the difference between Obama and Romney. Obama won by 3.8 percentage points, but in only 4 states was the election within 5 points. You go back, you go back 20 years, you have 25 states within 5 points. The states have moved apart. So whenever you look at a national poll in the presidency, you don't pay much attention to it. This is what you look at: Virginia, Ohio, North Carolina, Florida. Republicans really need to sweep those states. There's some talk that maybe they could substitute one for if you bring in Pennsylvania, you substitute. But these are the states that you watch the polling of. They're all very close now. I'm going to get the recent polling in those states. But this election is no longer a national election for president. Remember, 1960, Nixon went to all 50 states. You don't see that anymore. Republicans will go to California, but just to raise money, or New York to raise money. Democrats will go to Texas, but just to raise money. They don't have a reasonable hope of carrying it. And if they did, it means they've carried everything else before you get there. This is media spending in the last presidential election. Of the money spent on television, $896 million, 84% of it was spent in 7 states. So what that means for me, I always say, what does this mean for me personally? We have high hopes in Washington that the Nationals will be in the World Series this year, but it means I'll probably be seeing more of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton than Bryce Harper because of all the ads that'll be running in there during the World Series. Presidential voting, again, Romney, 88% of his vote was white, only 56% of Obama's. Again, it goes to the long-term problems Republicans have in terms of how they fashion their coalition. This map is a county map showing how each county, the redder the county, the higher for Romney, the bluer the county, the higher the percent for Obama in the last presidential election. Notice these counties through here. These are African-American majority counties. These are Hispanic counties. These are some Indian counties through here. Take the Northeast and the upper Midwest where the white vote is trending more Republican. But as a general rule, Republicans own rural America. The three major exceptions to that are college towns, majority minority counties, black, Indian, Hispanic, majority rural counties they lose. And then they also lose a group of rural counties I call the granola belt. Aspen, Vail, Sun Valley, Idaho, Taos, New Mexico, places like that. But it goes to the underpinnings of the fact that it's race, ethnicity, and culture are the aligning factors before you get to economics. As I said, 71 of the 100 poorest counties voted for Romney the last time. Now, Republicans have a problem in cities. You can take a look at, well, I'll show you the next map. This map is revealing of what's happened. This is a 20-year map. These green counties through here, this takes Obama's race in 2012 and Bill Clinton's election in 1996. And remember, Obama got a higher percent. And it talks of, these green counties are counties that Bill Clinton carried in 1996 that Obama lost in 2012. The yellow counties, most of them urban counties, Dallas County, Texas, my county, Fairfax, Virginia, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, Indianapolis, places like that. The yellow counties are counties where Obama outperformed Clinton. But look at these swaths. These are all white rural counties through here. Appalachia, you know, it's not just guns, God, religion, it's coal. It's all of these issues have just contributed to Republican gains in these areas. And so if you want to explain Donald Trump, take a look at what the Republican Party has become. It's a different party than it was in 1996. Your country club Republicans have moved away from the party, and Appalachian Republicans and poor white Republicans have moved into the Republican Party. A lot of this has been the emphasis on social issues and the like. Trump saw that, and he just came in and put an exclamation point on that. And now he's taken trade. A lot of white working class Democrats were afraid of the Republicans on Social Security and trade and those issues. Not with Trump. See, he's moved away on that. So I think you'll see a greater movement in that class toward Trump this year. The question is, what does he lose on the other side? But these trends have been in motion long before Donald Trump. What's the electorate look like today? Well, 44% are angry, 28% are anxious and uncertain, 8% are both. So is an incumbent, that's not the kind of electorate, a volatile electorate that you want to face. Now, not everybody that's angry is for Donald Trump. Some are for Sanders, they're all over the place. But the point is they are not happy with the status quo. I was telling our leadership at Deloitte, they said, oh, Bush, I said, Bush's going nowhere. I mean, first of all, there's a Bush fatigue even among Republicans. And when the guy gives a fireside chat, the fire goes out. But when Trump labeled him low energy, it just kind of stuck. But a lot of this, you talk about anti-establishment, people want something different. What I say about VOK, voters, they know when the shoe is pinching and it's time for a new pair of shoes. And they want to try something else right now. Let's look at the most recent polling. This is a composite, but this is reflective of about the last 10 polls I've seen. President Obama now, his head is above water. He is slightly higher favorable than unfavorable. You have polls all over the place, but these are not great numbers by historical standards, but in the context of today, they're actually pretty good. It's not enough to move your party necessarily into the White House. They're kind of right on the bubble, but in the context of a polarized country, those are as good as his numbers have been the last 2 years. Congress's job approval, on the other hand, 15% approve, 84% disapprove. There are some that have it as low as 9% approve. That's kind of the friends and family level. So anytime Congress faces off against the president, you know where the public is going to be. They kind of see it. The direction of the country, though, right track, here, let me move this back. Right track, 21%, wrong track, 68%. So 2/3 of the country think we're going in the wrong direction, and they are looking for something new. And then Obamacare, there's been several polls on this. This is kind of representative, but Obamacare about 10 points less popular than, I'd say, more unfavorable than favorable. You had some great beneficiaries of Obamacare, but you had some other people that were fine the way things were, and they're not happy with it. Trump versus Clinton, the latest polling, we just took the latest polling over the last couple of weeks. It's right within a point or two at this point. What's happened in the last 2 weeks since Trump has basically clinched the nomination of Republicans have come back. And I was saying this on Chris Matthews. I said, Chris, the Republicans are, at the end of the day, they're going to be with Trump. It's a long journey for a lot of them, but that's where they're going to be. And Paul Ryan's got to be there too. You cannot have a dissonant Republican coalition in the House and the presidency. It just doesn't work. This is survival. This isn't principle, folks. This is just survival. So this will be a close race. This is not going to be the kind of blowout and so on. And Trump has said some things that would have killed a lot of other candidates. But when you're a protest candidate out there, it's an atmosphere where at this point it's going to be a close race. And I'm going to get in some other numbers that explain it better in a minute. General election preference. This is a Washington Post poll that came out a few weeks ago, showed Trump slightly ahead. This is where the trajectory has been. You see how Trump has closed this from 9 points down to 2 points up in this poll. Now, it may be when Hillary gets nominated, she gets a bump and the Democrats start coming back to her right now that are undecided. But you got 26% of the electorate think both of them are terrible. And the question is always look at who are these people going to vote for? Do they show up? It's going to be a race to the bottom. This is a race to the bottom. Nobody's going to win anything saying I'm the good guy. They're going to say he's worse, no, she's worse. That's the way this is going. The Post poll was revealing and stuff. And look, these numbers can move around in different polls, but it's kind of indicative. Men, Trump 56-34 ahead. Women 52-38. Clinton ahead. Whites, Trump winning 57-33. Trump's got to up that about 4 points to win, to clinch a win. Non-whites 69-21. Trump performing about the same level as Romney, not considerably worse yet. Young people, Clinton only up by 3. She's got to improve that at this point. Older people, the older you get, the better off you are for Trump. But here's the one I like. College grads, Clinton 54-38, non-college grads 52-38 Trump. So these, as I said, this is not about issues. This is cultural identity politics, straight up. Primary turnouts has been very high for Republicans this year compared to 2008. As you can see, Republican turnout up significantly, Democrat turnout down. Traditionally, that has meant nothing in terms of the final election. Okay, we've seen this comparing other elections, and it doesn't portend historically a thing for the general election. You'll hear some commentators say, "Oh, the Republicans." Historically, it has not meant anything. But there is an enthusiasm gap. Trump's people are more enthusiastic than Clinton's. The red being Trump, 37% extremely enthusiastic. Only 25% of Clinton's votes are extremely enthusiastic. On the not too enthusiastic, 5% are Trump, 12% Clinton. Now, I will say this. I think people say, what's going to happen? I say two things. I mean, events make a difference. You know, what happens with an FBI investigation? What's the latest emanation coming from Trump and group that he goes after? What about how you run a campaign? And Clinton's people have clearly at this point have a much better campaign team. Trump basically absent on the ground. So all of these things matter, and you know, 5-6 months is an eternity in politics. I think events can play a key role in terms of how this stuff comes out at the end. Hillary's image ratings, as you can see, this goes back. She started 61% in 2010, up to 66%, and then just steadily down, where she has a 37% favorable with the electorate and a 56% unfavorable. Those are the second worst numbers in history. Who do you think has the worst? There he is, Donald Trump. But he's up a little bit. He's up from when he was, before he'd announced. So he's 35 favorable, 58. A slight advantage for Hillary on the favorable, unfavorable is, again, 26% of the electorate doesn't like either one of them and are in the undecided column, and that's going to probably decide where this thing goes at the end. Which party could do a better job of dealing with the economy? This is a Pew survey. Republicans have a slight advantage. Which party could do a better job of dealing with immigration? Democrats, only a slight advantage. Just depends on your vantage point on this. Which party could do a better job of dealing with the terrorist threat at home? Republicans 46, Democrats 37. Which party could do a better job making wise decisions about foreign policy? Now, this is party, not candidate. I just want to warn. 46-38, Republicans. Which party could do a better job of dealing with trade agreements? 48% Republicans, 37% Democrats. So the metrics right now are favorable to Republicans. And if you look historically since World War II, only once has a party been elected for a third term in the White House. That was Reagan, Bush. And Reagan's numbers were in the 60s, favorable as Bush was elected in 88. The other times it's been tried, the party hasn't succeeded, although you could argue in 2000, Democrats really won the election, and that it should have been Clinton, Gore. But traditionally, as we've kind of mutated into a parliamentary behavior, that gets harder and harder to sustain yourself for a third term. So the metrics favor the Republicans, but Obama's approval, 48-44. Look at this, the Republican Party, favorable 28, unfavorable 66. And say, well, why are the Republicans doing as well as they are? Well, because a lot of the unfavorables, people who rate the party unfavorably, are Republicans. So I said, right now, if the Republicans were a dog food brand, they'd just take you off the shelf with that kind of unfavorable rating. But they're very much in the game. Do you trust the government in D.C. to do what is right? This is a New York Times survey. Always, most of the time, 18%, sometime or never, 80%. Should government do more to solve problems? 39. Less to solve problems? 54. And that really goes with the fact that people think the country's moving in the wrong direction. 3 issues. This is from the Post survey. Trade with other countries does more to create jobs, 33%, cut jobs, 53%. Undocumented immigrants should be allowed to stay, 50%, deported, 44%. Those are pretty extreme choices. I think a lot of people are in the middle, but that, you know, when you break it down, it kind of gives you a feel. And then finally, banning non-Muslims, 43%, banning non-U.S. Muslims, 43% support that, 50% oppose. State polls. Clinton running well ahead in New York. I know Trump says he'll carry New York. I doubt it. I mean, just look at the historical performance, and the polling seems to bear that out. Arizona, a close race. There's another poll out that shows Trump moving into a slight lead. This is a state Republicans have carried 5 of the last 6 times. Trump needs that as part of his victory. North Carolina, Clinton and Trump. This was a PPP poll. I got another one later that shows Trump ahead, but that's in the margin of error. This is one of those 4 states that was within 5% last time. Virginia, a Roanoke College poll showed 38% for each. The rest didn't like either one of them. Wisconsin, Clinton has doing very well. Trump's got crushed there in the primary. There was some thought that, you know, because it's a white state, Trump would do better. Maybe, but we haven't seen that in any polling yet. New Jersey, Clinton comfortably ahead in 2 polls, 7 points in one, 14 in another. Indiana, this is a state Republicans have carried 5 of the last 6 times. Trump up 7 in a NBC poll in Indiana. New Hampshire, a WBUR mass poll, 44-42 for Clinton. That's margin of error. Ohio, a key state, 3 different polls. PPP tends to be a Democratic leaning poll, 45-42 Trump. Quinnipiac poll, 43-39 Trump. And Ohio CBS YouGov poll, 44-39 Trump. But these are margin of error races here. Pennsylvania, an earlier Mercyhurst University poll showed Clinton up 8, but a Pennsylvania Quinnipiac poll showed at 1 point. Florida, all within margin of error. Atlanta, Trump with a slight lead in Georgia. And then this finally just shows Trump's votes in the Republican primary in red states, in low status individuals in red states. This has been Trump's backbone. He does not do well in blue states with high income areas. It just shows where his primary votes have come, just a chart we put together. So that's the good news from Washington, and we have a few minutes now to, about 15 minutes to do questions and answers. Yeah, I haven't the slightest idea. I'll tell you what, the Supreme Court nominees look different, and for a lot of Republicans, that's kind of all they need is they figure the regulatory agencies and this stuff. I mean, nobody knows. I met with, was part of a team that met with the transition teams from at that point 5 candidates. It's just impossible to tell. It's just impossible to tell at this point. And I think, you know, how he defines it with his vice president and everything else is going to make a huge difference over whether he can attract independent voters and people that don't like both. So I really have no idea. Well, I think money makes a difference. It's not dispositive, but it'll have some. But there's plenty of money in this country, and You'll find other folks that are in. Sheldon Adelson's in for $100 million. They'll find the money at the end of the day. The key is the hard money that the parties need. The Republican Party's in much better shape than the Democratic Party because over the last few years they have been building a war chest on this. But sure, it can make a difference. Remember this, in 2008, McCain took the federal matching money. Obama had said he would, but then figured out he could do better not doing it. And he ended up down the stretch outspending McCain 2-1. And I think it had a big effect on the size of his win. I don't think it affected the outcome, but it had an effect on the size of his margin. So, yeah, I think it makes a difference. And I think Trump has to be careful in courting some of these Republican bigwigs because he's been picking on them the whole time. I can understand their reluctance to give, but he's got to be careful about if they're going to give it to him, they'll probably do it through the party or third-party groups, which are the way you do it now. And he can then say, oh, that's not me. Yeah.
Like the financial, economic, foreign policy, Republican establishment. I'm in foreign policy. I think of a guy like Bob Zoellick. Will people like that, in your view, eventually join Trump, also in a way to cocoon him should he actually win the presidency?
It's funny. I talked to Zoellick the other day, and he's certainly not there yet. The foreign policy group is probably the toughest group for him to pick up of the Republican coalition. I think a lot of the business people fall in line because you're talking about the courts and regulatory agencies. But the foreign policy people just he's made some comments that they feel are really screwy. And it's going to take something to woo them back. You also have what I call the respectability factor in some of these higher income suburbs. I know, look, my congressional district was the wealthiest district in the country. It had a Democratic lean to it. But putting up a Trump sign in my neighborhood is akin to a hate crime. And so there is going to be a huge role. Now, having said that, he carried the precinct in the primary. So but some of these folks reputationally are very reluctant to jump on that bandwagon and be identified with them. He's having trouble wooing people like Zoellick, who, as you know, is a summa cum laude graduate of Swarthmore and a very brilliant guy and a trade rep with anti-trade rhetoric and some of the stuff he's doing. That's his toughest measure. And I wouldn't be surprised if they sit this out and a handful of them go to Clinton. But it's not a huge voter block. Most people don't vote foreign policy.
Tom,
I'll get you next. Let's just hand the microphone to him. I'll get you in just a minute.
Tom, you've identified that a large segment of voters are angry about the status quo. Would you have some comments about what it is people are angry about, and why they're angry, and perhaps who they're angry at?
Sure. Well, look, let me just say this. Let me just paint this picture. We've had huge cultural changes in this country. Going all around. And we have a very divided country on basic value beliefs, race, LGBT, all this stuff. You have Black Lives Matter over here. You've got the face of America changing. You have the gay rights movement going. And then you have a group of people that economically really haven't been prospering at all and are very resentful. So I think you have huge divisions on this. I think some of the Trump voters are kind of a mere opposite of a Black Lives Matter who just view the life world through different lenses. This trade thing is, to me, I was an avid free trader. I don't make any apologies for it. And every Democrat in my region was for free trade, except the lady I beat for Congress. Her biggest mistake was voting for voting against NAFTA. But the two Democrats that now represent our area, both for free traders, our Virginia senators, free traders. We're a technology community. But we're losing that argument. What you see is with these working class voters at this point, they see these cultural changes. They're not seeing benefit economically. They see attention being paid to other groups, and there's going to be a reaction to that. And Trump has somehow put it in a way that people identify with it. We say it's not a philosophical connection, it's an emotional connection. That they feel. So I think it's all of these things. When you get too much change too fast and you get the kind of economic changes that were going on in this country with globalization and moving into an information digital economy, you're going to get these factions, and I think it's breaking out. The irony is that the poor look at this differently if you're black and if you're white. They have completely different views of this. And part of this is affirmative action, and it's a whole series of things. There was a theory V.O. Key had in his book Southern Politics, which Hallie Arkus had us read, that once the blacks were enfranchised in the South, the populists, white and black, would join together and form a coalition. It never happened because these cultural issues have just kind of submerged everything else. She's going to arbitrate who gets it, so I have to.
Could there be any surprise candidates coming besides Gary Johnson?
Yeah, Gary's not a surprise candidate. He's kind of a perennial candidate now, but there could be. But some of these filing deadlines are over. I mean, you can always sue to get it on. You're certainly ripe for third party, given everything that's happened at this point. I always feel that a third party is more likely to come from the right or left as one party centers itself too much. These parties have taken great pains to move over here and to move over here, as opposed to centering themselves, which is frustrating to some of us, but they understand that third parties traditionally arise out of the wings, which is what's happened in Europe and elsewhere. So it's late in the game at this point for ballot access, but there's still time to make mischief. Just remember this: if nobody gets a majority of the electoral vote, it goes to the House of Representatives, which is likely to be Republican.
Does the selection of vice president matter, and what will be their strategies, Clinton and Trump, as they pick a vice president?
Yeah, well, I think it generally doesn't matter, but I think it matters for both, but I think it matters more for Trump this year because nobody knows who he is. You ask me what the Trump presidency is going to be like. I don't know, but you might look at his vice presidential pick. Does he go with Kim Kardashian and go one way, or I'm just kidding, just kidding. Or do you take somebody who's a serious policy wonk, a Bob Corker, or you could do Mary Fallon, the governor of Oklahoma, or Shelley Moore? I mean, which way does he go? And I think that has a bearing. For Hillary Clinton, it's a little different equation. Do you go centrist and try to pick up disenfranchised independents and Republicans that are afraid of Trump and go with like a Tim Kaine or somebody like that from Virginia, which helps you carry Virginia, which is Democrats carry that, the Republican equation gets more complicated. Or do you try to go back and go left and try to pick up these disenfranchised people that are over there for Sanders and try to solidify your base? And I think that's the debate they're having. They're vetting people all over the place at this. So I think it makes a difference this year when you have two very unpopular politicians heading the two tickets.
Partisanship aside, around the water cooler, do you and your colleagues ever share any concerns about either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump as president?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. But what's the old saying? Politics makes strange bedfellows. You got your choice and you got to make them. And there's a lot of concern among Democrats, among why is she running? Can't we do something better? She's weak. What's going to happen? A lot of the Sanders thing is just the grassroots of the Democratic Party wanting something different, wanting the party to make a different statement from the Clintons and move generationally different. Even though Sanders is old, he represents a kind of different movement in the party. And I don't need to tell you among Republican establishment where Trump is. But at the same time, if you're Paul Ryan, you don't want to be too easy on the first date, but you know where you need to go at the end of the day, where you need to end up to protect your majority. And look, politicians act in their own interest. And at the end of the day, if Trump looks like a winner, you're going to see these people jumping on it. But there's been holding back, wondering, is this guy for real? Can he really make it? But they've doubted him from the beginning, and I think he's overperformed every expectations, including his own. If you look at his original contracts with his consultants and so on, everything he got over 10%, they get a higher boost. I don't think he expected to be where he is either. I don't think Bernie's going to be nominated, barring an FBI thing before the convention or something like that. But I think he's going to be a factor in the Democratic Party. I think he brings a lot of energy to the party she needs if she wants to win. And so I think she's more likely to go in that direction, and that's traditionally what they've done.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's terrific.